being recorded.
All right, 10 a.m. This is the Coastside Fire Protection District Special Board Meeting Volunteer Committee. Open session item 1 and item 2 roll call. Jean.
Yes, good morning. Director Cockrell. Director Hannah.
Here.
Chief Cox.
I'm here. Thank you.
You're welcome.
If you're okay, we'll skip the Pledge of Allegiance.
Good with me.
All right, and item number 4 is public comments. There is nobody in the room and there are no participants on Zoom. Which takes us to item 5, which is new business, review and discuss the following. Item 1 is the volunteer handbook. I know several iterations of this got sent out, so sorry that it has been so many back and forths, but I'm happy to make any changes that the committee would like to see.
Where's Torres Lane in West Beach?
Good question.
I couldn't find it.
Okay.
They just got oh, because I live up that part.
What page is that on?
Page 5 of 29.
Okay. Oh, the history.
Yeah, part of the history, I'm sorry.
Okay.
And the other thing that jumped out at me, which is probably a pretty small deal, is page 6 of 29, under CFPD staffing. The CFPD also has a volunteer research department. In other places, it refers to volunteer program. So to be consistent, that would have to say volunteer program.
Yeah, so I think maybe on that volunteer staffing, it should even just say, in addition to the Coastside volunteer firefighter program, and then go on to say what the staffing is. And take that out of the end. Would that work?
Well, okay, I'm just gonna change one word, but I was just trying to keep it short and sweet, but yeah, that's fine with me.
Okay. All right.
So it looks like a lot of the changes on this here, just cleaning up some language, some grammar, different mistakes. There's only a few things here that would be actual change to policy handbook. So,
Yeah.
deletion of support volunteer. That's a new item, right? Because that was existing prior.
That is, yeah. And the thought process there is if we can get 25 fully trained volunteer firefighters, we wouldn't be using any of those 25 spots for support personnel.
So it's based on numbers.
Correct.
Removal of it.
Yeah.
So what are our current numbers today?
We're at 21, I believe, with 3 support.
We need to clarify.
Who would be the support people? I always, I'm guessing Neil Soloway would be support,
Yeah.
and there'd be 2 others, which I can't tell you who they are.
And I'm not gonna say without guessing, because I've never seen it listed in such a manner where this person, I think Neil Soloway is listed as support, but I don't know exactly the other 2.
So I think a opportunity there is one, to get an updated roster from training on this beach. And then 2, consideration of if Neil does want to continue on the support role, is just putting language in there that says upon the retirement of the current support personnel, additional support personnel will not be.
Okay, and I would like to visit though, the fact that based on numbers, we should also review the current active members.
Yep.
Which would then lead us to reviewing the current inactive members, because I think we have some members on the roster that have taken other positions in other areas of the state.
Yeah.
And that being the case, they wouldn't clean this up, it would reduce our today, giving us more room to
I think that's a good idea. I think kind of process wise, for the future, just thinking about what the support firefighter role is, because we don't really have it well defined, right? So what if tomorrow 10 people said, I just want to be support? And our volunteer fire department, suddenly, volunteer fire department suddenly becomes a support organization. I would just love there to be some mechanism that doesn't make it just become a support organization, ensures that we have that firefighting capability.
I agree.
So I think I just need to throw a mechanism for that.
So we could work on potential language for position or not a support position. I mean, is it a matter of defining it better or clearer, or is it a matter of removing it based on your vision of how to keep it operational?
Yeah, so I think one potential idea is so my concern is this, is just, we have a very defined policy for volunteer firefighter. This is not very well defined for the support firefighter. Sure. Right, so like, what's the training requirement, what's the currency,
Right.
all of that stuff. So I think that gray area is where my concern is,
Right.
is here we have somebody who's a part of the volunteer fire company at an emergency scene, but they don't have the full training, they don't have currency, they haven't had a medical exam.
100%.
I just feel like there's that liability issue. And for me, I just like a clean cut, right? You're either a firefighter or you're not, right? If you're not a firefighter that's fully trained and certified and have your currency, you shouldn't be in an emergency incident. Is my perspective. So I think,
And just so you know, that's how I read it and saw it and felt about it, as well as far as, you know, your accountability from running the district
yeah,
with the volunteers that are capable of running any incident,
yeah,
having this support personnel potentially on board that day or that incident
yeah,
causes, like you said, a liability potential.
right,
Whether it's being defined or removed, I don't know I mean, removing it obviously solves the problem
right.
from a liability and all other aspects. But is there not maybe room to maybe look at defining it in a way that also solves the problem, but then keeps, you mentioned one legacy way of doing it, right?
Right.
Certain individuals who have been with us for a long time that want to stick around and still be involved, but it is defined or at least explained that they are not to
Right.
be doing active scenes. I don't know.
Yeah, it's
I mean, I'm sure there's people on the fire ground like a PIO or someone who's not trained as much as the firefighter 2 engineer or whatnot. So
they have, but the issue is they do have a requirement for training every year.
Okay.
And then they do have a currency that they have to meet.
Sure.
Right, it's not that you have to be one or the other, it's that there has to be something in place that defines what their role is, what they can and can't do. And I just come back to what we're trying to do is build a volunteer firefighter program. And we don't want to, in my opinion, open the door to 20 people suddenly becoming support firefighters. Right, and if we don't define that, I just worry that we leave that door open.
right.
So I can be a support volunteer, if I, you know, since we haven't defined it, then I could go ahead and show up at incidents and everything else. And then someone would have to tell me, no, get away. And this could be maybe a volunteer who was a regular volunteer for a year or 2 or 3, who would stop attending the drills as required, stop training as required.
Right.
But since he had already been part of the volunteer program, he'd show up at an incident
Right,
and just get right in.
yeah.
And I can see that being an issue.
Yeah, the other issue I have, and this comes back to just kind of maybe a mindset piece is, especially for trainings. My desire is training is very focused on whatever the subject is at hand. And if you have people there who are there not because they have to pass that training or do that training to be successful, but they're there because it's, you know, something to do or it's somewhere to be or something to be involved with. Not to say that's good or bad, but just saying it can take away from all the focus is, which is actually focus on those skills. So I just think the support position really needs to be kind of thought about as kind of what the the district's position is on it. I know from an operational position, I get nervous when it's not defined and the liability and just the numbers. If we have 25 people who are willing to be volunteer firefighters, I'd take 25 volunteer firefighters who have a defined program. As opposed to support.
Yeah, yeah, I think they need to answer one of your concerns about potentially having a larger number of support versus active, or the possibility of that occurring. You know, maybe we can define that, if there's only, if there were a support role moving forward, that there's only a certain number of, and they're listed as these individuals, like you said before, I guess it's kind of. Because I totally agree with you from an operational standpoint.
Yeah.
And training standpoint.
Yeah.
That needs to be defined, so that when a volunteer unit is activated, company is activated for an incident, that you're confident that the people there are trained and up to certifications that they're supposed to have. And without the possibility of someone riding along for the day.
Right, right,
Right.
yeah.
So that's,
All right, well, I think we should kind of asterisk that and see what some languaging might be and look at some other examples, maybe from other organizations about what that is.
What page was that?
That was on page 8. Yeah, the other piece that kind of comes into the support sphere is the Half Moon Bay Volunteer Fire Department, which is a nonprofit organization. And I do know that there's a lot of confusion about the volunteer fire department versus the COSI volunteer firefighters. And I think one intent of this kind of handbook and policy is to really clarify that it's this is our purview is the COSI volunteer fire program. And I think that's really important in this.
yeah, I think from what I've read, it looks like you defined the separation of the two entities quite well.
Yeah,
And I have no qualms about that. I think they are two separate entities.
yeah,
And I think you're right, there has been maybe some confusion just because of the past and history, and obviously board members, myself excluded, have been around a lot longer. So they experienced the HMV volunteer fire department being active, maybe at some point. So, but to clarify, yeah, I think it.
Okay.
What page is that on that it's changed from, do you remember?
That's on 5. It just talks about who the Half Moon Bay Volunteer Fire Department is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, okay. I read that. This is similar to some of the volunteer departments back east, where it's very clear, you have the operational side,
Yeah,
and you have the auxiliary side,
yeah,
and then maybe big, relatively big, where they don't have any paid personnel at all they have is volunteers.
right,
And,
right.
And they separate it.
Between those two items, like I said before, a lot of the remainder is cleaning up grammar or
For anything else
mistakes, anything else, yeah.
that you see that grammatically needs to be changed?
I have not.
Yeah, on page 9 of 29. During general alarms, the in-house company will respond to station reporting to mobile reserve engine, respond alarm. Then it says the remaining. And I think it's just it appears to me that the remaining,
The sentence doesn't complete.
yeah,
Page 9,
Page 9 under COSI volunteer. company
yeah, so the
composition,
remaining should have been
First paragraph.
moved to
last
the
sentence.
second paragraph. Does that make sense?
yeah.
Yes.
So one thing and one additional thought I had with that was we shouldn't box them into saying that they'll respond just to station 40. I think we should open it
Yes.
up and just say they will respond to a COSI fire facility to staff appropriate apparatus. And,
I agree.
and not just this station.
Well, it doesn't make sense for you having an incident in Moss Beach. And a volunteer who lives 2 blocks from the station responds here, then goes back, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
Or, I mean, does it make sense to generalize it and say that, you know, based on what Director Cockrell just said, as far as their location, plus communicating with their officer,
yeah,
and they make a decision on the best. You know, we do need you at 40 to cover, or no, head of the scene, so it's
Yeah.
kind of a fluid. You know,
yeah,
situation,
yeah,
maybe make it more open.
yeah, I think that's good, yeah. And JB, where was that grammatical error you saw?
Page 9 of 29, if you go to the end of paragraph 1. It says, with the intent of mobilizing the reserve engine to respond to the alarm, period. Then it says the remaining coast side volunteer company, well, the remaining is at the end of one paragraph. And then the next paragraph starts out with coast side volunteer company members.
Okay,
And so to make the flow, it should say the remaining coast side volunteer company members will respond to the incident scene via personal vehicle. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
Okay. It's just a.
perfect, that makes sense.
The remaining.
Okay. Anything else on 9 or 10?
I had a question, but I think this. One of my questions was, do the volunteers have to live within the district? And the answer is yes.
Yeah.
And it's also on page 9,
Yeah,
because I was thinking, I'm a young guy, I want to go to work for whomever.
yeah,
LA City, but I live in Berkeley, so I joined the Coastside Volunteers, get my year in.
right,
And then when I apply to LA City, I've got it on my resume, which qualifies me to go to work there.
yeah, yeah. Not unheard of.
Yeah, well, we had a guy once that came here, became a Coastside Volunteer. And was a Coastside Volunteer for a year and then moved on and didn't respond to a single incident here at the Coastside.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's, and yet we bought him the equipment and trained him and all that kind of stuff.
Right. Okay. One piece, kind of on that. Talking about training and licensing and certification. Is just maybe putting in here,
Or what page now?
oh, I'm not on the page, I'm just in general. Putting in here. Some sort of metric for the roster, the volunteer roster, whether it's every month or every 6 months or every year, that it gets reported back to the board as far as how many responses each person went on, whether they're considered active or inactive or support. Just so that there's some, I feel like we don't have a reporting metric back for what the status of volunteers are.
Well, we have to come up with define active and inactive. Right. Define active, I mean, do we have a definition for active?
I don't think we do. I think it just talks about kind of responding to
Yeah,
calls.
right.
The main piece of it. And that's a question, right? Is there a threshold that needs to be met to
Yes.
remain active?
Yes. And I think, if I read through this, I couldn't go right to it, but it says you missed like 2 consecutive training sessions. You have to basically explain it.
Yeah.
And then make them up.
Yeah, it's basically written as 2 unexcused.
The 2 unexcused, okay, that was it.
Right.
I think if you're. No, but I think going back to what I said earlier about maybe not defining, but you know, appropriately listing current volunteers and their roles per se.
Yeah.
You know, which would then give us the information on whether they're active or not.
Yeah,
I don't know, I like what you're saying about having some kind of metric to know. I don't know if we define it as a, a certain threshold requirement or not, but it's worth at least looking into. Who are these individuals?
yeah,
What are our actual numbers today?
Yeah.
Since that is, and has been a thing that we've talked about, raising the numbers to 25, which has been done.
well, and there's also there's the potential latitude to say, hey. If the fire chief. Deems the volunteer as inactive. Right, I think there's a reasonable level of expectation from the department as far as what is active versus inactive.
I agree.
I would hate to say you have to make this many calls a month, right? People are, I'm
Or
not
a certain number of hours, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think I could use some additional language though.
Well, how many of the, okay. We're authorized to a strength of 25, we currently have 21.
Yeah.
Realistically speaking, how many of the 21 are available? To go to work,
Right,
At a given time.
yeah,
I mean, at least,
Right,
yes,
right.
50% maybe, but again, that's a good thing, like you said, and people. As a volunteer, they're obviously doing other things. Or
sure, of course,
they're working.
people work, of course, well, by definition.
I guess to give an example, I mean, this past week, we had 7 or 8 individuals on. On the shift, on working, so you can probably assume that that's a fair. Number of what would potentially show up for a. need.
So we had 14 who were essentially not available. No, that's what, I don't know if that's.
Well, I think we need to
a good way
define-
say it or not.
Because I think out of the
Yeah.
21 we currently have, we've got some individuals working elsewhere. We've got some individuals that are in the current support role. So I think we should, figure out those exact numbers.
Well, if you're in a support role, then that should authorize us to backfill that.
Yeah,
with
does
an
that take
active-
away from active role?
Yeah.
and that's where it comes down to numbers.
Right, that's why it's the question.
Yeah. Well, let's do this. Let's put some more thought into what that might look like, at least put some pen to paper and see if we can't get a draft of what a roster, a status is. And then also look at some language around support personnel.
What I see going on here, being, well, I guess the closest thing you're gonna get to a good old boy around here. Since we've been here since 77, I'm watching this whole area, not only fire service, but everything. Become more, for want of a better word, more professional, better run, more, organized. We're back in the day when just a handful of people lived out here, everything was kind of. Loosey-goosey, everything was. Kind of good old boy network, and I don't mean that being critical, it's just
Right.
that you didn't, none of the structure was required.
Yeah,
And everything, the way the schools are run, the way the business, the way the public works is being done, everything now is more professional. When I first got here, in our house, there was a leak in front of the house, a water leak from the water main. And so I called, it's pretty good was to find out where to call, but I did. And they said, oh, thank you. And period of time, the guy shows up in a car, just like anybody else, and he kind of sees the problem, he goes and opens his car, he pulls out a shovel and a pick and starts digging in the street. And I'm thinking, oh boy.
who's this guy?
Yeah, well, he responded, and now, if I recall it in, the truck would show up with some workers that are trained with the proper equipment, and so that's one of the way it was to the way it is.
Yeah, well, I also recognize we don't want to make it bureaucratic and have unnecessary
Sure,
stuff too. right?
absolutely.
Like that's,
I agree.
efficiency has got to be the kind of priority on all of
Yes.
this. And finding that balance.
Well, that's right, like this, you can give us a document that was on one page.
And let me just say as well, I mean, my involvement in the district and the volunteers myself since 2019, and I've seen nothing but a well-run, executed organization. And the individuals that joined then and since are very appreciative of that and are hungry to do more.
Yeah,
So to define these specifics in this book, as well as moving forward to make sure that the individuals that do take their time as volunteers get out of it the experience that they're being trained for.
Yeah.
Right, so that we're saying to the volunteers, you know, we're gonna offer you the training, we're gonna offer you all this experience and knowledge.
Yeah.
So that you can then be an effective firefighter.
Yeah.
And just, you know, at that moment, you're removing that word volunteer, because on the scene in the day, you're a firefighter in the scope of what that means to be a firefighter, along with the paid staff, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that helps, defining some of these things will help move that to where I think the majority of the volunteer firefighters want to be,
Makes sense.
which is 100% effective alongside, in addition to the paid staff.
Yeah.
Not just, you know, a lesser trained organization or an organization that's not able to do certain tasks or whatnot.
Right.
So,
I think that's a good call, and I also want to make sure the volunteers feel as though they have an expectation when they come in about what the program is, right? Because I think back to the loosey goosey piece is we want to make sure they feel confident that they know, okay, this is the expectation of what's expected of me and how it all works. Whether they want to know it all is up to them, but at least it's there, should they? And it's going to outlive me or Gary or any of us as far as the future and perpetuity is what the program is, because, you know, a lot of times if we don't document it, it's not actually going to continue.
and then this, the policy 1000,
Yes,
is this a new document?
this is a new document. So the direction from the board, the full board meeting from Director Burke was an actual board policy that said what the parameters of the program are from the board. Kind of a very broad based.
Is there anything in these paragraphs that differ? I mean, it kind of mirror images a lot of what's said in the handbook. So
It mirrors a lot, it's a lot broader. So it just basically says, you know, the board authorizes 25 volunteers. You know, they can respond to incidents. Well, I guess the big thing that the board is really policy saying is they are co-side fire volunteers, right? That board policy is that they're co-side fire volunteers. And that there's a handbook that the chief will bring to the board, that the volunteers will be in accordance with the policies and procedures of the district. And then this may have to get updated based on what our decision is on the support personnel. That's probably the biggest change out at the moment is kind of what that looks like moving forward.
all right, so moving forward in regards to that, what would you like to do? Come up with maybe some ideas of what that could be? I mean, right now we're saying we'll move it completely.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of saying, let's look at, is there another option?
Yeah.
If not, you know, but, so another discussion to be had about that.
Yeah, you know, I think my perspective on it is. If we're gonna continue to have support personnel, defining what the position is. And let me go to worst case scenario, a support personnel gets injured at the scene of an incident, right? What was your training? What were you doing there? What are the policies? Where's your duty statement? Where's your stress statement? What is, and we as a district take on the liability of that employee, even though they're a volunteer under our workers' comp. I really want to ensure that if we do go down the path of whatever number of support personnel, that it's clearly defined and, you know, what's the training, what's the scope of work, how does it operate? Because I think liability wise right now, that's probably one of our biggest vulnerabilities as a district is having people at emergencies who don't have a defined program.
Makes sense.
But I also understand and respect, you know, someone like Neil has been around a long time, has provided so much to this district and allows a lot of knowledge transfer. It may be something like we've done with Roger, where we say, you know, the phasing out of the support personnel. In the meantime, here's what the position, you know, this is what the expectation.
I mean, I think that could be a fair way of looking at it, and then making sure it's defined specifically from the liability standpoint.
So,
We need to define who those individuals affect as well.
Right.
And that goes back to what we
so
said earlier.
by naming the support personnel, that means as they leave for whatever reason, they're not backfilled. Would that be an accurate assumption?
Correct, yeah,
That's good.
And maybe if we do go down this path of defining it. Making it for specific individuals until they retire, let's say.
yeah,
That those numbers, if we get those numbers, if it's 1, 2, or 3 or 5 people. That would not count against our total, or would, you know? Because,
I would say it would until they retire. Only because. You know, we have the cost of outfitting still, we still have the workers' comp costs, there's license training costs associated with it. Unless we get to a point where we have. All these volunteers who want to suddenly come on board, which is. Probably not likely, but I mean, we're seeing it right now when there's more than one year training, and one above it up to 25. Yeah. There's also just a span of control and management piece to it too, from training staff.
and incident.
Yeah,
Staff.
So to be sure then, the current support volunteers will remain until they die or retire or leave.
yeah, until they're no longer
Right,
active.
right.
Yeah. I think that's fair.
And said support staff, I mean, obviously, if they're not trained or current on their certifications, they're not. In turn, need certain equipment as well, right? So.
Yeah,
You're not expecting that individual to throw on a set of turnouts,
right,
or they shouldn't be throwing on a set of turnouts, actually.
right. But we have, uniform page or.
Yeah.
All the and the pricing for jacket and helmet, obviously, to identify themselves.
So then if I'm a support volunteer, there are basically no requirements for me to do anything. If my name could be in there and I could maybe show up when it felt like cool or was down
I
the
think it
street.
is currently defined as someone who's been in the volunteers for at least 5 years.
Yeah,
And it does have a definition of vague, but it is in there.
it doesn't talk about its training or anything
No.
like that.
What page is that the definition of support? I missed that.
I think it was on the red line version.
Yeah, it's gonna be.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Page 8 of the red lines.
But I think it's comfortable to say that moving forward, we're not adding a new member to the support role. So therefore, we're looking at who currently exists as a legacy support individual,
Yeah,
honoring their time and service, letting them. With a new definition of what that role is,
right.
let them stay as that role until they retire.
In their current
Yeah.
set of support personnel.
Yeah, but with a more specific definition of what that role is,
Yeah,
meaning what they can and cannot do, and from the fire chief's perspective, what is appropriate.
Yeah.
From a liability and all that standpoint,
yeah, I think that's valid.
because at the same time, as much as, we want to respect those individuals, we also want to respect the individuals that are current and active. And we don't want that to cause an effect where, because of the support staff, it's hindering the active staff.
Yeah, and if they do have something to offer in the support role that can be used, you also don't want to not utilize it. Well, I think then I will add some language to the support piece. And also the roster piece. On the policy, I would almost say that all definitions and references to support volunteer firefighters, we just eliminate that and stick with volunteer firefighting auxiliary organizations found in the previous.
That's referencing HME.
Exactly, yeah. Okay. That makes sense. And I don't think actually that changed the support position being phased out over, attrition, as attrition happens. I don't think that's a huge change. Okay, that's easy enough to do.
Do we currently have something in the policy that, or the handbook that is language towards an individual that's still on our roster, but is due to life choices is, no longer available, or are we still leaving it because they're a volunteer? That when they are available in here, they're still able to actively join. I know it's kind of, and being a volunteer myself, and there's times where I've been unavailable due to family illness or whatnot, and I was not around for a period of time or whatnot.
Yeah,
And that, who's to say that someone that's working seasonal
yeah,
for 6 months of the year, fighting our forest fires in the state, that when they are available, they should still be able to participate. So I know there's no language to that. I don't know. Maybe there's a reason, like keeping it open, but
yeah, so there isn't, but I have seen in other manuals, you can apply for a leave of absence,
right. I think that.
and, that's something that's probably the best mechanism.
So if someone was on a leave of absence, then that would not count towards our current numbers.
That,
Again,
it would,
okay, so there's no benefit then from our current number standpoint. If we look at, say, a few individuals that aren't available a certain part of the year,
right,
whether a job or school or anything,
right,
it won't change their numbers.
Well, it's a kind of matter of volunteers who have a job aren't not available while they're at work.
right,
If they work in San Mateo, they work in San Francisco.
I guess my
Yeah.
point was more individuals that are, physically out of the area for
Right.
a longer period of time.
right,
Again,
I can think of two people that are volunteer firefighters who are also seasonal firefighters,
Right.
Cal Fire.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure they ever asked for a leave, they just understood.
yeah. No, and I'm not trying to, I'm just looking at it from the standpoint of defining the numbers that we currently have.
right.
But I think we've just answered all that.
Sure.
I think that makes the most sense. Anyways, we've got to volunteer, you don't want to exclude them from something because of their day job.
Right, yeah.
Which I know for some people is local, some people is not, so.
Yeah, that inactive status.
Mm-hmm.
One other topic of this, and we're kind of blending the policy in with the handbook, was on the issuance of items from the district, the items that we actually issue them. The only other change that if I had my magic wand, is we issue the,
Page 8.
yeah, sorry, page 21 and 22. Which talks about this specific,
Are you on the new copy or the red line?
new copy, you have a clean copy.
Okay, hang on.
We do issue obviously the company officers radios. From my perspective, I would like all of our volunteers to have radios, just from a safety perspective. The career firefighters obviously have engines or radios assigned to their apparatus. But from a volunteer perspective, especially if they're showing up at the scene of an incident, having communications for me is one of the top priorities, and I would like to see that moving forward is making sure they get radio issued them as well.
So that radio would be different than the radio pager in charge of that would be a real radio.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
The pager is on monitoring.
I understand what a pager is, so. It's come a long ways from the original pager, believe me.
Anyways, I agree with you. Chief Cox. Cool. And if we want to add into equipment, obviously some of these things are perishable. We can't wear a t-shirt for 10 years, so.
Right.
Should we put anything in there about annual renewal of damaged or worn out equipment?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, is just saying, the district will issue additional items as needed.
Yeah, I mean, the training captain or chief or whomever.
Yeah.
There should be just a mechanism so that can occur. Maybe it's every January people write down or whatever it may be, but whenever needed if it's damaged. And I mean, this list may never be perfect, but I think one of the things that I definitely know we all need right now is rain gear,
Yes,
or at least a rain coat that's appropriate for the district.
yeah, I think John put that
I
order
think
in.
it's already been
Yeah,
discussed or done, but yeah. I mean, I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but I mean, the reality is if there's a pair of gloves that we need in the future or something, I'm sure that'll be. If the volunteers need that, it'll be handled.
well, we can also add rain gear. What did I put that in as a note? Well, I think wet weather gear is gonna be one of the other additions, right?
And that would become before or after successful completion.
That would come after successful completion.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, anything else on the manual or the policy?
Well, not that I've noticed.
So I would maybe suggest that I take another stab at those edits and then send them back and meet again next month. That might work for you?
So ultimately, all this will go before the board for, okay,
Yeah, eventually, once we get it right.
yeah, that makes sense.
Perfect. I think I have my notes there and my marching orders to what to work on. If there's no more items on that, then the third item is just the paramedic training program, and a quick update on that is we solicited interest from the volunteers to see if there was any volunteers interested in going to the program. If they were, then we had them on an orientation meeting last week or earlier this week, I can't remember. Just running through what the program is, where it is, what the expectation is. I think we had maybe 5 or 6
Beautiful.
volunteers who
Beautiful.
showed interest.
Great.
The next phase was actually taking an EMT test, and Captain Pickard put on that test. I think we had 3 volunteers actually take the test. So now what we're looking at is where we put the threshold for people that we recommend to move forward. But my general observation is we'll most likely be looking at 2 or 3 individuals that may qualify to go should the district want to sponsor.
I don't have any problem with it. I mean, I think it's probably a good thing. Obviously, you don't have indentured servants, but I would like to see some way of saying get some value.
Yeah.
I think industry where I came from, if you go to work for certain companies, if you leave before 2 years or 3 years, you have a number, you owe X amount of money because they spend a lot of money training you and getting you qualified. And then if you go somewhere else, you then be taking all this training experience with you. And they want, hey, give us our money back. And they do. And they enforce those in court. Service academies, they give you a good education, but then you have to do some service. It's not for your whole career, but you have to give it maybe 3 or 4 years.
Right.
So I'd like to see something similar for the paramedics that we sponsor.
Right.
And that does make sense, the reference you just made, in a paid career position, but we are talking about volunteers. And individuals that are getting training that they can use as volunteers as well.
Yeah, and Gene, I don't know what your perspective on it is, if the district's paying for training for volunteers, what we can expect of them upon completion.
Well, I have seen it handled different ways. Some organizations indicate that if you stay X number of weeks, months, years, you will get a certain percentage paid for. Some just forgive when you go away. The issue is always if someone leaves, trying to collect the money back. you know, if you say we will front the money for you, but then if you don't stay 5 years, you owe 50% back or whatever. Sometimes it becomes difficult to pursue collection of that, but you can have that type of a policy, yes.
Does this program differ in any real way to other trainings that cost the district time and money? I mean,
Not really. It's just probably more money, and more time.
yeah, for a small number of individuals that have tested and are able to do it.
We have had volunteers that did get qualified as paramedics. And that was the only thing that qualified them at that time to go to work for big city departments. We had one person who went directly from here, LA City. Otherwise, that person would not have been hired except for the fact that there's a paramedic. And then they had another one that ended up over in East Bay,
Right.
as working for a paramedic company, not as a firefighter. So
And Gene, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is there, because the volunteers are not employees, we can't hold them to, hey, you must stay volunteering for 3 years after we send you through this training.
That's correct.
Right, so that's an option.
Yes, so that, you know, the best way I kind of been framing it is a little bit of a leap of faith by the district.
And I was gonna say something to that, which is these are already current volunteers. They've been through all the training, they're active, they've got a number of years of service already to communities, therefore, long story short, they're already vetted. These are people we trust.
Yeah.
These are people that have skin in the game for our community. So I look at it like a win, even if the worst case scenario is they go work for some other organization, that they still might live here and still be an active volunteer.
Absolutely, yeah.
And be able to utilize that training as a paramedic. So that also leads myself into the next question, which is, can a volunteer, or how can we make it so that there's a program that a volunteer can actively work as a volunteer paramedic and have a effectively ALS engine then?
Right,
And I know there's got to be a mechanism for that to operate.
yeah,
We have all the support existing within the district.
yeah, that's a really good question. Can we have a support? We have support. We have volunteer firefighters who are EMTs, and they obviously work as EMTs. Can we have volunteer firefighters, paramedics, and paramedics?
And from what I know, and I'm not an expert in this, but from what I know, the general answer is yes, because the caveats tend to be more of an issue of, do you have the structure in place for training and oversight and all these issues, and but please look into it. I think between CAL FIRE's support network through the contract with the district, we should have all those things.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Then we're adding an actual volunteer paramedic. And whether it's just their day off from working on the district, or they're just volunteers,
Right,
there's still another paramedic that can assist.
Well, okay, I'm taking this to the next level. We have a day where there is no member of the district of the district professional staff who's available. Could a volunteer come in on an ad hoc basis, fill that position?
yeah,
So that way, when the engine responds, it's still a paramedic engine.
right. So what we would do is, it would have to be a fairly dire situation for that to happen. Because what our labor contract allows is we can force anybody in the county, in county hire or co-side, we can force a paramedic to work where the hole is.
Okay.
So if there's no Medicare today, and the guy going off, or the gal going off duty at Pescadero is a paramedic, they're gonna get forced to work for a day.
I realize that there's a system within the CAL FIRE system to make sure that hole gets filled.
Yeah,
But, going back to the ability for a volunteer to assist in that role is something to look into, only because I realized we discussed the previous board meetings, the life cycle and
yeah,
the cycle of our co-site paid firefighters.
Yeah.
And I know that obviously can, not always, but can impact their life,
Yeah.
their personal time, right? Or their ability to feel, happy in their day, as far as, forces cause a lot of movement, and it's literally that, to be forced to work when you're not expected to. So there is that side of it as well. And if you had someone that was licensed and within, going back to what I said, is there a system to have a volunteer work under our current system, if that did exist, and that would, be a
Yeah.
huge benefit.
So I think the other piece of that puzzle is, two pieces. One, labor would not be supportive of it most likely because it's a paid contractual position. So you're gonna have a labor battle. Two is, at what point do they become an employee of the district? And there's a certain hour threshold, I assume, for labor code that says you now have to pay them retirement, you now have to pay them medical, right? And all these things where they're working shifts, behind a paid professional, they're now actually.
Maybe we just start with, can they operate as a licensed medic, as a volunteer?
Yeah.
We can, we're looking at getting, let's say, 3 volunteers to become licensed paramedics.
Yeah.
Obviously, that can benefit their career, whether that's on the coast or elsewhere. But I'm looking at it from a perspective of how does it benefit the coastsiders, them working as volunteers, and if they can't work as a paramedic, then it seems we're not utilizing that as best we can. So
Yeah.
look into that, make sure that there's a way, if there's a way, how we do it, so that a volunteer medic can operate as a medic.
Yeah.
When,
I was gonna say, wouldn't it be nice to have volunteers that are qualified medics?
well, and like Chief Cox said, I mean, if you're an EMT, you're operating as an EMT, and honestly, if you're an EMT or a medic and you're not on duty or in uniform, you're still a medic or an EMT.
Yes.
And you're still operating under the license of Dr. Gilbert.
Yeah.
Of the county of San Mateo, so, yeah, let's look at that, because that would be a huge benefit
Yeah,
to the coast.
yeah, that would be, I'll chat with Ken and Nate about that and see what the potential is, but I also think that also creates the nexus between going to training and actually having some benefit to the district.
Yeah.
Yeah, good call.
So obviously it's moving forward, and there's a time frame thing, right, because this course is starting soon.
There is,
Correct,
yeah,
March.
March 28th or something.
Okay, and going forward, are we creating a paramedic program that is a one-off, or are we creating a paramedic program that is gonna go through the future?
I think yes and yes. I think it's a little bit of a trial this time to say, hey, this is viable. This is gonna work. And then the hope is that the program actually comes to this county and is at CSM. We have the ability to make it a lot easier for our volunteers in the future.
We've had volunteers that became qualified paramedics. I don't know how they did it. I assumed they would have done it at CSM, but I don't know that.
Yeah, so CSM doesn't have a paramedic one. They might have gone to Foothill or to
Maybe for the, okay.
or CFTI. Yeah, San Jose's got one. This specific program, the reason it's different is it's actually designed for firefighters.
Okay.
So most paramedic programs are just open to whoever, as long as they have EMT experience and have passed the test. This exact program being run and kind of multiplied is specifically for people who are in the field, want to go from firefighter EMT to firefighter paramedic.
Okay.
And, just on that note, what was the other organization that was providing funding aside from COSAC?
Ooh, I'll have to give you that name. Yeah, Nate
It
had
was
it.
something like 9 and 6, right, where the numbers like adding up to about 15 was a
For the
total cost.
Total cost, yes.
District cost.
Yeah.
About 9.
We were able to pay 9.
And then there was, I don't know if a grant is the right term, I don't know what it is, it's government.
I think it's a county workforce development.
Well, that was 4 people.
That was
that would-
up to 4,
Oh,
yeah.
up to, I was gonna say, now we have 3, because we just,
I think it's on a per person, not a single bucket.
all right.
Yeah, and I know the program that they're running right now, because they're currently in the middle of a paramedic program, this program right now, and they have 18 firefighters going through it. And they all seem to be doing well, because it's a small group. They said it's really important to keep it small, just so they get the attention they need to get what they need out of it. So hopefully this next class is also small.
And then I did notice from the first discussion of this with Chief Armstrong to the email announcement to the volunteers, the verbiage has changed slightly as far as the expectations, starting with where it did start, but we expect you, then acquire a position in the Coast Side Fire Protection District, CAL FIRE, to, we would prefer, and I'm not using the correct.
Yeah.
Should that be in there at all? Even if it's more of a suggestion. I mean, is there a real reason to write that in a document?
I think
When we all already discussed that we can't actually control what they do or don't do.
right, I think it was just in there to show to them that there is a mechanism to get hired in CAL FIRE.
So maybe we can write it in a way that just specifically talks about that, and the possibility of getting a position with the district and CAL FIRE versus the expectation is that we do this.
Yeah, I think it was the
How is it?
expectation is that you would be able to get hired. And I don't think that's unreasonable, because if you pass the CAL FIRE exam, the medic exam, and you get on the list, we have 8 vacancies in this county. I mean.
Oh, no, I just wanted to make sure that it was open enough to any volunteer that wanted to act for the Coast Side as a medic.
Yeah.
That maybe didn't have a desire to work as a paid individual.
Got it, yeah.
I didn't want that
Yeah.
individual to feel pressure or.
Got it, yeah,
Oh,
like
yeah.
they have to go work the company.
And even if it said like, I mean, yeah, I think you got what I'm saying, but
I totally agree.
anything in there that's leaning it towards that direction, like I said, it did start off a bit stronger in the language.
Yeah.
Then it got a little less.
Yeah.
I think moving forward as well, like, cause I asked, get into this in the future as well.
I think that'll really come back to, can they act as medics in the district? Because if they can, then, oh yeah, maybe I just want to be a medic volunteer and help my community.
Right.
Versus I want to get a job as a medic.
And again, I did a little research on that, and again, I'm not an expert in it, but from what I found out, as long as you have the proper training and facilities and staff that fill the role that you need, then have paramedics working there as a volunteer,
Yeah.
it should be a doable thing, so.
The one thing we probably will have to define pretty heavily is just narcotics and accountability for narcotics, because when you have a pool of
Sure.
volunteers coming in to use the same equipment, narcotics really becomes the controlled substance.
When if we have 3 individuals that become volunteer paramedics in the near future. Those individuals will be accountable for it in the same manner that I guess the paid staff are, and I don't know exactly how that's signed in, signed out, et cetera, but I'm sure there's ways of, I would hope.
No, there's volunteer programs too, I think, yeah, but obviously.
All right, last thing that I think was brought up previously that I want to make sure we mention again, is there anything else looked into as far as accommodation for these individuals, or, you know, it is 3 days a week for about 7-8 months in Monterey?
Yeah, so the current location is, I think, Marina or Seaside. They're potentially looking at putting it in somewhere closer, like Santa Cruz County, depending on what the composition of the class looks like. Either way, we can house them at CAL FIRE facilities in Santa Cruz.
So you do have housing available. The 3 days a week, consecutive,
Consecutive Wednesday, Thursday, Friday.
good.
2
Make it
nights,
plus.
so Wednesday night, Thursday night.
So when I go down there, I don't want to keep driving back
No.
to Canada.
Yeah, and there's accommodation either at Pajaro Valley, Pajaro Dunes, or Corvallis.
Sure.
So it's a 20-minute drive back and forth to class. But there's gonna be no out of pocket for them for accommodation. I wish I was 20 years old and had this opportunity. That's all I could say.
All right, so
Yeah, I think we covered what we came down here to cover. It was a.
So moving forward at the board meeting,
Things.
the regular board meeting.
So I think what we need to do for the regular board meeting is we need to make a recommendation from the volunteer committee as to what direction the board should take on the training, the paramedic training. Is really what.
I would like to have seen 4 with authorized. I'm disappointed, but 3 is better than 0. That could have been that too.
Yeah,
Pretty good number, I think, 3 other.
yeah,
Or possible, honestly. Because you not only need someone to be an EMT, they have to have been an EMT for a period of time. And these, you know, I would assume a lot of the individuals are young in their life and career.
Yeah.
So it's great. So we can clarify a few things we've discussed then. maybe,
Yep, yeah.
And then I realized that there was testing, I don't know if we have results,
Yeah.
but you mentioned a threshold, I think. By assuming that the score,
Correct.
what is there a standard, right? There's gotta be a,
Yeah, so I'm not running it, right? It's
Okay.
Chip and Nate who are running it, Chief Armstrong.
It makes
we
sense.
shouldn't lower standard,
Right.
so whatever the standard is.
Yeah, so I think there, this group on the coast is just one of the groups. There's also a group on the county side. Both career and volunteer who are offered as well. So I think what we don't want to do is have someone who doesn't have a firm enough grasp of being an EMT and sending them. So I will defer to them because they're both medics and I'm not a medic as far as what that threshold is.
Again, I mean, that has a lot to do with the board as well. Have a level of success and we want to continue this program. I don't know about the funding. Is this something that would move forward as well? These other, the non-coast side funds, the
Yeah, that's also a good question.
funds coming from the next on that.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know that we can answer that.
Yeah.
Right, like
Because right now there's like a national paramedic shortage or at least statewide,
nationally.
national, no, that's a thing. All right, cool.
Well, maybe we get arranged to get you admitted to that.
That means I get to go back on the fire engine, right?
I think it's a fantastic thing, opportunity for everyone.
Yeah, I agree.
Especially the coast side.
Well, the idea of volunteer paramedic, I find very appealing.
Yeah,
I really do. And we've had them in the past. They
yeah,
just didn't make a big deal about it. They just sort of, if they were volunteers who did this on their own
right.
and became paramedics, and then all of a sudden, well, where'd he go? Oh, he's a paramedic over East Bay now. Oh, okay.
Right. Yeah. Perfect. Anything else?
I don't have any.
All right. Gene, how about you?
We have a member of
Nothing
the
else from
audience-
me, thank you. Nothing.
We have a member of the audience who's got a question.
Are members of the public allowed to ask question or submit question for next time?
We had public comment already, but.
Just for this one.
Yes, we can have public comment.
Yeah, please.
So this is public comment?
Yes,
Okay, I have 3 questions. And again, I apologize if I missed the answers. How many people are there in the support capacity? Number 1. Number 2 is, once support volunteers have stepped back due to attrition, once they've all stepped back, can the 501c3 name be changed to encompass the whole volunteer organization? And number 3, does the district have any access or control with the 501c3 funds? Those are my quick 3 questions.
Great. I'm happy to answer them if they will. As far as the number of people, I think we discussed that as far as getting an updated list on training as to the numbers. The 501c3, we have, as a district, we have 0 control.
Okay.
And 0 influence on.
Okay.
And that is. Yeah, not within my purview.
And I think the handbook is clearly stating that it's a separate entity and there is no coastside district control or interest.
Right.
that's exactly correct.
Okay.
That's not, we're talking about the 501c3 volunteers, not the 501c3 that's the cert.
Nothing to do with
That's
it.
okay, but,
Strictly
Not really volunteers.
well, you have a certain amount of credibility to come in here, then, well, wait a minute, what is?
Oh, right now, I'm just a member of
Okay, thank you.
thank you. Then my next question is, if the Kaplan Volunteer 501c3 was no longer active, it's not difficult from a technical standpoint to change the name of that to Coastside Fire Protection District Volunteers or whatever the correct name would be, because they essentially have the same function in the 501c3 description. They operate in support of the district. So would that be a possibility in order to continue to find ways to accept donations and to pay whatever bills come up through that volunteer organization?
I would assume so, but I can't speak to
Well, I think the question would be, we required to have you support people to have the 501c3, and I'm not sure that that follows.
No, you're not required to have the support
Right.
people, but it's the name of it. The name of it
Okay.
right now is the Half Moon Bay Volunteers.
Right.
That's the 501c3. If that function essentially closed because the leaders are back, then what you have is volunteer firefighters, and it's just a matter of changing the name of that 501c3 to transfer the funds, the ability to function as a nonprofit to the coastside volunteers.
So the coast side volunteers then would become the 501c3.
Correct. If they want to,
Okay.
I'm just putting this out there,
Yeah,
doing it is not hard, but they would have to
Yes.
want to do it,
yes.
and that would be up to the organization.
To me, that would be confusing.
Chief Cox, I'm really sorry to interrupt, but I think these questions, we should probably defer to the board meeting because we might have a Brown Act issue if we're engaging in conversation because we have not noticed this is a board meeting. And if we're having board members, committee members, having conversations with a board member, I'm getting a little concerned about the Brown Act. But I think these are all valid questions and we should bring them to the full board when we come with the, come back with the policy to be looked at.
Sounds good.
Absolutely.
Sounds good.
So the
Thank
fact
you.
that she identified herself as a member of the public because she's a board member, then this muddies the water. I get it, I get it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else?
No, nothing for me.
I mean, I would like to just, for the record, mention the work that was put in by our
Oh, boy.
volunteers.
Yeah.
January 4th through 5th. From 7 o'clock in the morning on the 4th. Till 1 o'clock in the morning on the 5th with a break. So 8 o'clock in the morning that day, so 5:30. And I think I counted everything as best I could. There was about 7 volunteers in that period of time. Working a total of about 27 and a half hours, responding to about 30 calls up and down the coast. And it not only worked out well through the organization of the DOC and EOC and the ability for this group of individuals to literally do an incredible amount of work for the community. And so I just want to give some credit to those individuals for putting in that time. I mean, it was
I think we should do that at the board meeting.
yeah, so maybe, I mean, I quickly jotted down,
Yeah.
there's literally notes on papers of the calls and different things.
We should maybe get something written down, maybe put it in a minute.
Yeah.
So it's, that way it's public.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And
They did a great job. And I know that with the internet going down to, this was one place where you guys got involved, and it was a big undertaking by volunteers to go on all those calls.
There was a period of the day we became somewhat concerned at home. The internet was down and the cell service was down, by the way. We didn't talk about that.
Yeah.
And so eventually, at least where I live, you had a bunch of people with no way of calling for help.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
Just sort of getting in the car and taking the chance.
Yeah, no communication.
And part of our roof blew off and that, it could have gotten pretty bad.
All right,
on that note,
on that
Thank you.
note, yeah, moving to adjourn.
What's the adjourn? We're adjourned.
Thanks, Gene.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.